In this discussion, we'll try to talk about post-colonialism as well as post-colonial studies and post-colonial theory. These are all interrelated terms, and in fact, one can be substituted for the other. So we'll rather focus on post-colonialism as the term which we will be using frequently. Post means after, and colonialism, of course, is quite well known, but here specifically the European domination of the greater part of the world during the 18th and 19th century, including Africa countries, India, etc., are referred to. Starting more or less with the independence of India in 1948, all these colonies of Europe started to become independent. So, at the primary level, post colonial refers to this fact, that is, after colonialism. However, this is not a very simple description of the state of political independence of these countries. Postcolonialism has been both a complex and a compound field of studies of the history, culture, tradition, or rather we can say histories, cultures, traditions, economics, then political formulations and formations of all these societies which were once the colonies of Europe, especially Great Britain. So the field is an interdisciplinary one. And one of the key questions is that whether the political independence of all these areas have led to actual freedom from all kinds of colonial mindset, frames of reference, etc., in the countries which were once Europe's colonies. In this regard, the concept of decolonization offered by Ngugi wa Thiong'o is very instructive, where he says that as long as the colonized country doesn't make itself free from all kinds of colonial frames of reference, it is difficult to say that it is independent or free or decolonized. So, possibly post colonialism, in the sense of after colonialism, is a state which is yet to come in the true sense. We are striving for it, we are striving towards this goal, but it is yet to come. Actually, we haven't been able to decolonize ourselves fully. Perhaps it is not possible also. A very important thinker, Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak, has said that in case of India, around 200 years of colonial rule, the history can be rewritten but can never be unwritten. It has been part of our culture. Even the very fact that in this video we are talking to each other in English, or the continued privilege of English education both at the primary, secondary, and tertiary level in a country like India. And in fact, ironically or most importantly, the Constitution of India is written in English. There is a Hindi version, but the provision or proviso is that if there is controversy between the two versions, the English version will prevail. So, in a way, the nationhood is also guaranteed by colonialism or colonial language, colonizers' language. So we can say, after such knowledge, what forgiveness? However, there have been strategies, ways, and means to counter this imposition. While Ngugi's stance of decolonization or avoiding English completely is not a practical feasibility, there are other kinds of avenues. For example, using English to the minimum, or getting used to using English only as a library language or medium of communication without overtly influencing ourselves with European culture. As in fact, Dogi himself said these things in an essay published under the name of Abolition, or on the abolition of the English department. Coming to the hardcore theoretical side of post-colonialism, three figures are very important: Edward Said, Homi Bhabha, and Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak. In fact, Edward Said is the key figure or monumental figure of this study that we call post-colonialism or post-colonial studies. In a book published in 1978, Said has made a detailed study of the representation, or rather the misrepresentation, of the Oriental world, especially the Middle East. Also, it would include Far East, India, etc. The misrepresentation of all these places by Western learners, scholars, intellectuals, and travelers. They always approached the Orient with a fixed set of mind. Orient was associated with all kinds of negative attributes, or which was perceived in the West to be negative, especially after Enlightenment. That is, the Orient is irrational, unscientific, regressive, effeminate, or lazy. Oriental people are lazy. Whereas the Western or the European self was projected as scientific, advanced, proactive, you know, uh, masculine, those kinds of things. So, Orientalism, in fact, Said says, created the Orient, which may not be actually the same with the real Orient. In fact, which may not be the actual Orient. He writes, Edward Said, in that book, 1978 book, that at one point of time, Orientalism overrode the Orient. We can see this trend still continuing in many movies, novels, etc., published and produced in the West, especially in America. What was done by Britain and Europe in earlier days are now continued by America in many Hollywood movies. Finally, it is the American army which is victorious over detractors in other lands, or even in English movies, for example, James Bond is as the service of the colonial powers, erstwhile colonial powers maybe, and he is invincible. Wherever he goes, he finally turns out to be victorious, and this has ramifications for both erstwhile colonized states and the colonizing city. So it is not that the textual scholarship of Orientalism which created the Orient in the 17th or 18th century. In fact, Said goes far back. He says he finds out traces of this trend of misrepresenting the Orient even in the days of Aeschylus. Anyway, this trend of misrepresenting the Orient has not ended in the 18th or 19th century. It continues till date. So the way is to challenge these representations by writing our own works of literature as well as theory. Just as at one point of time, women felt that all the literature that was projected, read, critiqued were basically male literature, so they started writing a literature of their own. Later, third gender people have also started writing against or in addition to both masculine and feminine literature. Similarly, the writers from the erstwhile colonies, they have started writing, and now very consciously, against the misrepresentation of the colonizers. One of the most foundational texts in this regard, so far as creative literature is concerned, is Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. And of course, among the theoretical texts, Said's own text, Vava's Location of Culture, or Gayatri Spivak's excellent work on Can the Subaltern Speak, on which we must dwell for a while. In this text, she brings to the fore the position that during the colonial times, early colonial days of India, there was a huge fight regarding the sati system, burning the caste Hindu widows mostly. Her argument is actually not in favor of sati or against sati, but the point that Gayatri Spivak tries to highlight is that the entire debate which took place regarding Sati, while with Ram Mohan Rai and William Bentinck and others, were uh, critiquing and trying to stop, and finally they were successful in stopping this atrocious act. And on the other hand, the great Indian scholars and pundits were defending this act. Both these were males, that is, a group of men speaking for women's rights and a group of men speaking against women's rights, or rather a particular kind of women's right. What was the women's voice, or what was the women trying to say regarding this? Were they at all authorized? Were they even able to speak for themselves? Or is it that they spoke but they are not on record? So it is entirely a very, frustrating and unfortunate thing that we do not have the voices on record of the primary stakeholders on Sati. So, with this, she has extended post-colonialism with the question of bringing in the question of women, and especially suffering women. Similarly, Homi Bhabha has extended sides theory by certain other proposition, one of which is, for example, that of the third space. It is not that the colonizer or colonized were always antagonized to each other. Well, Said never said that. But Bhava seems to imply that from reading Said's books, it seems that colonizers and colonized were always antithetical to each other. So there were places or spaces where, a kind of understanding took place, mutuality took place, mixture or hybridity took place, etc., etc. But the main thing that remains still late, notwithstanding Bhaba's challenges or other people's challenges, we live in a world which still it uses predominantly Western or European frames of references, prejudices, methodologies, some of which may be scientific, objective, but most of which, especially in humanities, are quite subjective. Subjectivity disguised as objectivity. So we will have to keep on making interventions to bring in more and more indigeneity without again being prejudiced. Just as Said said that when he talks about Eurocentrism, that is, taking Europe as center in all modern knowledge, discussion, discourses, he doesn't want it to be replaced by a kind of Afrocentrism or Asiacentrism. In fact, center will not be there. A very potent trope he has used, it is later work, Culture and Imperialism, is that of contrapunctuality, on which we'll talk in our next video. This was not a very coherent video. I designed it that way. Just a side said that Orientalism is theoretically inconsistent when people pointed it out. He accepted that and said that it is designed that way because the situation after colonialism is like this, fragmented, and we have to put pieces together, yet a complete picture may not emerge. This is a kind of forced fragmentation which you will have to bear with, but hope you can take some leads from these and start your own investigations. Thank you so much for bearing with me. Goodbye.